next, talking about myself. So we're gonna talk. Several of the group leaders who are based in the David Attenborough building are just going to go through what our research groups do, and we're all going to be quite quick at this, about 3 or 4 minutes at most, and you can tell me off if I go over my limit. So so that's Howard's job. She can wave like this if we go over. So my group is the Forest Ecology and Conservation Group, and this is actually my website, which just shows you how much time I spent preparing this talk. And what we're working on is mostly we're very interested in conservation at landscape levels, particularly of forests, and we're using all sorts of data to address these problems, but we're very interested in high resolution remote sensing, and we've had a lot of fun with airborne technologies over the years, which have got very, very high resolutions in order to spot individual trees and understand processes at very fine scales. So you can this is, go to the next slide. Oh, too many slides. So this is just from our website, some of the recent papers which we've worked on. So the microclimate paper is actually looking at the way forests sort of modify the climate substantially underneath themselves. So actually the way we manage forests strongly influences the impacts of climate change on things which live in the understory of forests. So a lot of European forests are actually becoming denser and more closed at the moment, and that to some extent counteracts the effects of climate change. There's one example. So we've been working on river flows in Mediterranean systems and showing that that actually if you plant trees, it's not very good for water supplies, because trees are much better at soaking up water from the ground than shrubs or grassland. So actually the abandonment of agriculture across the Mediterranean is having and the restoration of forest cover is actually having a bad effect on water supplies in the lowlands. And we've used our technologies, hyperspectral sensing, to pick up changes in the leaf chemistry which happens in tropical forests when you log them. That's another piece of work we've done. And this amazing video at the bottom is a really nice bit of fun one of my postdocs had last year, going in search of the Amazon's tallest tree. It was spotted in a laser scan, and then he went off and had an adventure and made a video afterwards of his adventure, and so you can watch that. Just to, and I'm almost over my 3 minutes, I'm sure. Just one piece of work which we're doing at the moment is just to look at how effective REDD projects are. So payments for ecosystem services at actually reducing deforestation. So that's the basic thing that the REDD projects are meant to be doing, is reducing deforestation, and hopefully being beneficial to livelihoods and biodiversity at the same time. And we've taken a look at lots of projects across the tropics. And the sort of good news story out of that is that what we've got here is control versus intervention. So REDD projects are red, funnily enough, and blue is the areas matched to them which are nearby. And what we find is if the forest is very accessible to human activities, then actually the REDD projects are very successful against the control areas. But as you go further and further away from cities, then actually the many REDD projects in accessible areas aren't very different to in their deforestation rate to what we see in the control area. So REDD is having a limited positive effect actually where it matters, very close to centres of deforestation. But there's lots of REDD projects which are a long way from those areas. And just to finally mention, I created this Centre of Earth Observation about a year ago, and this is simply a website at this stage where anybody working on Earth observation technologies are welcome to join this website and put your details in and publications in. And at some stage up the road, perhaps we'll develop this into something else and try and bring in some grant money or whatever. But at this stage, it's just an opportunity to share what you're doing if you're working on Earth observation technologies. So thank you very much. Oh, it's over to me now to introduce the next speaker, who is Chris Sandbrook. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, David. I'm afraid I don't have any fancy websites as you do for your research group. I'm just going to speak without any slides. So hi everyone, I'm Chris Sandbrook. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Geography. I have a rather interdisciplinary background, so I actually trained originally as a zoologist, a conservation scientist in Cambridge, but then I decided after graduating that I really wanted to retrain as a social scientist to be able to engage with conservation as a social and a political problem. So I did my PhD in anthropology, actually at this place behind me, Bwindi Impenetrable National Park in Uganda. And then I ended up as a human geographer and in the geography department in Cambridge for the last 10 years now. So my research is really about the relationship between conservation and society. And I think of my work as falling into 3 different themes. And I'll just briefly tell you about each of those themes. And as I do, I'll mention some of the other researchers that I work with. I'm very privileged to work with under those different themes. So the first of these is about the relationship between poverty and conservation in the global south. So how do we bring together and reconcile efforts to alleviate poverty with efforts to conserve biodiversity? And there I'm currently working with, as a postdoc, Gediminas Lesoutis, who's working on a project called the Development Corridors Partnership, where we're looking at how to do large-scale infrastructure projects in East Africa in a way that is more socially and ecologically sustainable. So he's working in particular in Kenya on the standard gauge railway project there. I'm working just since recently with Sophia Cook, who I can see on the call, who's working with me as a postdoc on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in the Galapagos Islands, which is a really exciting project for us. And as a PhD student, Annette Green is working with me on perceptions of wildlife corridors in Tanzania. Then the second theme of my work is about the social and political implications of new technology in conservation. So actually, some of the same technologies that David just talked about, which are very cool and exciting, may also have social and political effects on the ground that we need to understand and, where necessary, mitigate. And in that area, I'm working with Krishant Simlai, who's a PhD student, looking at regimes of surveillance in Corbett National Park in India and the way those affect local stakeholders. And then the third and final theme of my work is about the values that conservationists actually hold themselves. So trying to understand people like many of you and why you do conservation, why you care about conservation, and how that relates to the way that conservation decisions are actually made. And in this area, I'm working with Rogelio Luque Lora, who's a PhD student, looking at place-based values in Chile, and with a new PhD student, Valerio Don Francesco, who's going to be looking at human-wildlife conflicts in Italy and the perceptions of different stakeholders towards wolves and farming. And you'll hear more from Valerio later because he's going to give a flash presentation this afternoon. So aside from my research, I'm also the director of the Cambridge Masters in Conservation Leadership, which is a professional training program for mid-career conservationists from around the world, many of whom are on the call, and hopefully there'll be a lot of interaction throughout the year between them and the research community that we have in Cambridge. And I'm a member of the CCI Council, so the governing council of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. There are 4 University of Cambridge members on that council, and I'm fortunate to be one of them. So that's just a quick introduction to me, and I'm going to end with an apology because I've got to go and collect my kids from school in a few minutes' time, so I won't be able to stay for the rest of the afternoon, but I hope you all have a great time, and I look forward to meeting and working with you throughout the rest of the year.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, I've forgotten about my son. Maybe I should be picking him up from school. Never mind. No, my wife's picking him up today. That's all right. Over next to Laura Diaz Anadon. Thank you very much, Laura.
Thanks. So hi, everybody. It's great to see that there was so much interest in this. I'm going to share my screen. I have just a couple of slides. Here we are. Can you see the screen? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be speaking not just about the research of myself and people working with me, but about a broader group of researchers, that is the Center for Environment, Energy and Natural Resource Governance. The short version of this is Synergy, and it's a research group within the Department of Land Economy. The Department of Land Economy has several centers, and Synergy is the part of land economy that is part of the Cambridge Research Institute. So I'm going to be talking more broadly about the research of the group And later on, you'll hear 3 other members of the group. I'll tell you a little bit about this in a second. So for myself, the only thing I will say is that I'm trained in engineering, economics, and public policy, and my research is very multidisciplinary. So what is Synergy? Well, since we have about 20 very active researchers, and that's not counting people that work with us and fellows of Synergy, the best thing I can do in this talk is to direct you to our website. It's synergy.landecon.cam.ac.uk. But just as a preview of what you will see here, again, it's one of the research centers in the Department of Land Economy. Is based now mostly virtually in the David Attenborough building. As part of CRI, it has over 20 researchers. In addition to that, we have fellow collaborators. And then the mission of the center as a whole is to conduct integrative research on the governance of environmental transitions, understood as a social and technological process driven by environmental constraints that lead to fundamental social organization. Very long, but hopefully from this definition, what you will kind of deduce is that we are a very multidisciplinary research group. We have people trained and working on economics, law, governance and policy, engineering, finance, and beyond. And again, this is just the opening website for Synergy. I will just say a couple more things about the structure, just so that you get some sense of content beyond disciplines. We have 3 main research strands, and each of those research strands is directed by a different person. Of course, these research strands are interconnected. So, as I mentioned, I just became the director of Synergy, and I'm leading the research area on climate change and energy policy. Professor Andres Conteleon, an environmental economist, he was the previous director of Synergy, and he heads conservation and biodiversity policy stream, and you're going to hear from another member of our department later on, Dr. Leo Liu, who is working in this area. And then we have Professor Jorge Viñuales, who is leading the environmental law and governance stream, and he was actually the founding director of Synergy just before Andreas. And here I also wanted to mention Dr. Pablo Salas. He's the deputy director of Synergy, and he works mainly on climate change and energy policy, but also on a broader set of areas. So these are the 3 main areas. Again, we collaborate across, and there's various disciplines covered. And I wanted to conclude, this is the last slide, or the last substantive slide, just to give you a sense of the people who are in Cambridge working in these areas actively. Again, if you go to the website, you will see that there's a big list of fellows. Here I try to group people across these 3 areas. Again, it's impossible, we're all working across some of them, but you will get a sense of the Synergy researchers. Some are PhD students, some are postdocs, some are visiting scholars. Again, from here, in addition to Dr. Leo Liu, who is in the conservation and biodiversity area, later on you're going to hear from Tia Yang, who is a PhD student, working with Professor Jorge Viñuales and I, and also you're going to hear from Dr. Ayora Zabala, who is in the conservation and biodiversity stream, who is a fellow and did her PhD in the group. And finally, if you want to actually learn content, we work with integrated assessment models, with policy evaluation, econometrics, with qualitative case studies, with behavioral experiments and these sort of things. The best thing you can do is to, again, go back to the Synergy website, and on the right-hand side of the main screen, you have the recent publications. So this is, you can go down, that's the most recent one that appears right there. And if you want the comprehensive list of publications, again, that's the link. You can go to the publications, selected publications. And without further ado, we have a lot of projects. Again, we are a lot of people, so there's a lot going on by international funders and national funders and partners. We're all kind of interconnected. So I did want to mention related groups at the university, Energy at Cambridge, Cambridge Zero, EPRG, the Winton Program on the Physics of Sustainability, the Bennett Institute. Again, these are all interconnected with CRI. So we are all, we all link with all of this. But I thought it was worth putting them on the slide because those people who are new to the group, it may be hard to navigate all of this. I thought it would be worth flagging this. And last, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to meeting, all of you in one way or another.
Hopefully that other way will be in person sooner or later. Hey. Thank you very much, Laura. Next, we've got Lynn Dicks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for so many people being here. I have to start my 3 minutes with an apology because I was working in the David Attenborough building this morning and there was a power cut. Some of you may know the power suddenly went off. And so I've been left in Cambridge with no access to any files and a laptop that doesn't really work because it's recently updated. And teaching supervisions on a phone, which has been really fun. So I don't really have, I had made some slides to show you about my group and what we work on, and I don't really have that. I've just got a few pictures which members of the group have managed to send me in the last hour when my laptop finally started working. So apologies. Right, so I'm in the Department of Zoology. I'm quite recently arrived as a lecturer in ecology. I'm an ecologist by training, but I've worked for many years on science and policy interactions as well as ecology. I'm setting up an agroecology group in the zoology department as part of the conservation science team. So at the moment, quite a lot of the members of the group are still at the University of East Anglia, which is where I was before. We've got 3 postdocs and 5 PhD students, and now we've got 2 master's students starting as well this year, just started. And I suppose that as a group, what defines us is that we do research that I would call as transdisciplinary. And that means we're challenge focused and we work with partner organisations always, preferably from the outset, to define the challenge and bring in the people and the methods and the techniques that you would need to tackle that challenge. We have a preference for insects, which comes from me being an entomologist from my PhD onwards, particularly pollinating insects. But we work generally in the area of agriculture, and I think we're addressing 2 main challenges across all the work we do. The first of those is how to maintain biodiversity in intensive working landscapes or productive landscapes. So there I'm talking about the places where most of our food is grown, and I'm really working with intensive commercial farms rather than smallholder farms, or where obviously lots of food for lots of people is also grown. We've tended to focus on the big scale international exporters and so on. So very intensive farms. And we're looking at how and why you want to keep some elements of biodiversity in that landscape, partly to make the matrix, like what in landscape ecology you would call the farmland, the matrix in between the protected areas of natural habitat. And we're interested in making that matrix less hostile, so making it a bit more penetrable for the species that do live in protected areas. But also looking at the ecosystem services that are particularly important to productive agriculture. From my background is in pollination, so obviously that includes pollination, and that's the one that's been best characterised and valued. But pest regulation is also really important. Soil fertility and nutrient cycling, for example, are really important, and water quality. So all those ecosystem services that are very useful to productive agriculture. We have field sites in the UK and in northeast Brazil, in the states of Bahia and Pernambuco, where they grow a lot of fruit for the British market and for everywhere else in the world. I've got a few pictures to show you. I hope I'll have a minute left at the end. And we're using a range of methods, including, well, I've got one PhD student who's using DNA sequencing to look at the different pollen that bees collect in fruit farms. We use remote sensing, including passive acoustic monitoring in Brazil. So we've got a PhD student and now a Part 1B ecology student looking at audio files recorded on these farms, which is fascinating. But with a view to looking at the bird communities. We use modelling and field experiments. So that's the first challenge. And there's another strand of work in my group, I'd see as a completely different challenge, which is about how you find and make use of the best available evidence for questions in policy and practice in conservation. And there I'm involved with a project called Eclipse, which is a science policy mechanism for the European Union. That's been running for about 4 years and is now moving to something called Alternet, which is a network of ecological research institutes across Europe. And there we take questions or requests from society or government or industry about, so what do you need to know about biodiversity and ecosystem services? And we gather groups of experts to answer those questions. And my role in that is all about the methods you use, which are not always the same methods. So sometimes you want to do something, you want to consult the scientific information and do a systematic review or something like a conservation evidence type approach. And other times you just want to ask people because the knowledge you need is not necessarily documented, but it's in people's heads and minds and experience. So there's a whole body of work that's about that. And part of that is something called the Cool Farm Biodiversity Tool, which is a piece of software. I work with an organisation called the Cool Farm Alliance, which is a partnership of many of the biggest food industry companies that you can think of. And they have together created a set of software tools that allow farm scale evaluation of sustainability. They have a greenhouse gas calculator, and we've built a biodiversity metric. So if you're interested in that, get hold of me after this. I'm going to share my screen because I've got some pictures to show you. I thought it would just be useful to give you some images which tell you the kind of context in which we work. I hope that the slideshow is going to work. So that's, yeah, can you see that? That's me on one of the farms that we work on in Brazil.
Rather dark, I'm afraid.
Sorry?
Dark,
we don't see it.
It's dark. Oh.
It's nighttime in Brazil, isn't it?
Yes, it was very dark. We actually do some astronomy as well at the same time. No, it's not going to work. So this is the part of the problem I'm having with my laptop. In that case, oh, hang on. Something might happen in a minute. I can't see whether you guys can see it.
It says Lynn has started screen sharing, but it doesn't actually show us much.
Just wait. How long have I got on my 3 minutes? Is it already over?
-2.
-2. Oh, but well, maybe I'll stop there then. I'll just stop unless you didn't see. Did you see the picture? No.
We're good for time.
Apologies.
You're right.
This is a demonstration of how not to use online meetings and presentations. Sorry about that. I was just going to show you some pictures of the farms on which we work and the stuff we do. So I think you got a sense of it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And I was also in the David Attenborough building this morning and with a meeting with the School of Physical Sciences. And just as I was meant to be saying goodbye, the big goodbye happened with somebody's drilled into a mains electrical cable or something, and so the whole of the Downing and New Museum sites are out. So I've cycled back home, but my internet here isn't very good, so the connection.
Downing site's fine.
In and out. It seems all right this afternoon.
Downing site is fine, David.
Oh, is it back good again? I think it was. Yeah. Anyway, oh, you're in there.
It might be only the new site, the new museum site that went down. It might be okay by now.
Both of us. Thank you so much, Lynn. I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to show your slide.
Okay.
We've got Andrew Friend next, please. Can you unshare yourself?
No. Sorry. Can someone do that for me? I'm now stuck in the process of sharing. Hopefully someone else can take me off.
I don't know if I can.
Or I can just leave the meeting. I'll try. I can't do anything now.
I think I've got the power.
Good. Yeah, please.
No,
good job. Someone has the power.
Howard, do you have the power?
I'm trying to. I've just tried to stop sharing your screen, so hopefully that will work in a second.
What I might do is just turn off my computer. I'll try that.
I think it's frozen it, Lynn.
Howard doesn't have the power.
It's not. I might have to. Would you mind logging back on, Lynn?
She's gone.
She's logged off, so you can't communicate with her.
Okay, so do you mind if we try not Andrew, but we come back to Andrew because I'll be sharing my screen with Andrew, and let's see if someone else can share their screen and override Lynn's.
Just a moment. I'll see whether I can. Lynn, just seeing her. If she's not on our list at all, so she must have crashed out. But somehow her system is not crashed out by the looks of things. Oh, this is exciting, isn't it?
We're back.
I've done it. I pushed a button and it worked.
Okay, so we can go ahead with Andrew.
Of Charlotte, it's very weird. Instead of yes, you. You're looking surprised. don't know what happened there. Andrew Friend next, please.
Thanks. Okay, here's my not such interesting first slide as David's. Hi, yes. So I'm Andrew Friend, and I've recently moved into the David Attenborough building. I'm in the Department of Geography, and I've been based in the Geography Department buildings for over a decade now. And I was trying to think how to describe myself. I'm really a plant ecophysiologist, if that makes sense. So I look at how plant physiology interacts with the environment, and I've really been working at the global scale for many years now. I've worked in a number of different labs in different places, in particular trying to couple how plant ecosystems, how vegetation ecosystems interact with the global carbon cycle and with climate. And so, Hoa, could we have the next slide, please? Thanks. So I've got a small group at the moment. Hopefully this is going to build up more into the future. And these are I have one postdoc, Zhao, and 3 PhD students in the group. And Zhao's been here for a couple of years, and he's working on a project with colleagues in America, looking at how what controls tree growth and how that interacts with the global carbon cycle. We have some experiments linked to that project, which I'll mention a bit later. Anne-Marie's been working for a few years on looking at the physiology of how trees work, how carbon moves around in trees, and in particular how growth occurs and what controls that, which is really surprisingly not very well known. And then there are 2 recent people who've joined the group, Martin and James, as PhD students. And Martin is going to be working on using remote sensing to have improve our understanding of how plant hydrology works, how plants work in terms of transporting water and how they control the hydrology, particularly of the foliage, and how we can observe that from remote sensing using microwaves at large scales. And James is going to be working on very much a modeling project, but looking at the ability of the models that we have to really test whether different ecosystem types of how vulnerable they are, how resilient they are to stresses such as climate change, pollution and land use change, and coupling animals and plants into that. So I'll talk a bit about that as well. I've got a couple more slides that show some of the science that we're working on. So, I mean, the overarching questions for me that really drive my research are: how does plant physiology and climate interact to control the spatial distribution and functioning of ecosystems? And then what's the sensitivity of particularly the terrestrial carbon in vegetation and in soils and species distribution to drivers such as climate change and CO2 and land use? And I'm involved in a number of different projects that are using our model tools to address these questions. And the main tool that I've been playing with for a number of years is a model called Hybrid. And it's a globally distributed model here. It's a 1/4 degree map of leaf area index. And this diagram is just to show some of the types of processes that are treated and the kind of inputs and outputs that we have. So clearly we can drive this model historically. It runs at a very fine timescale, about 30-minute timescale, but it can run for centuries. And basically the aim is that it predicts everything from first principles. So you don't give it a map of vegetation, it tells you what the vegetation is. And the aim is to see do we have enough knowledge to really predict that and how it's behaving. And we do this using submodels of vegetation dynamics and surface hydrology and so on. And more recently, we're looking at can we just stay there? Sorry. Thanks. And so we've been looking at how to incorporate land use into this and then look at how that impacts on vegetation distribution and its interaction with the environment. And the outputs are these carbon nitrogen fluxes on the surface, vegetation type and surface hydrology are the main things we're looking at. So the next slide shows this idea that we have working with the WCMC to couple the Mattingly model with the hybrid model and get these things talking to each other, where the Mattingly model is much more focused on higher trophic levels, animal populations, and has a very simple vegetation model, whereas hybrid is a much more sophisticated vegetation model, we think. So these things we want to be talking to each other and then test ideas about resilience of ecosystems. And they'll talk to each other by animals, grazing and browsing vegetation, and the Mattingly model will pass back detritus from the animals and so on. So we have a full biogeochemical coupling as well between these systems. And this is something that James is going to be working on in his PhD, as I say, with WCMC. So this has a lot of potential relevance for a number of conservation projects, I think. And then the next slide is just kind of more overview of where we're going with this model in terms of my particular interests, and that's to increase the the biological complexity, the ecological complexity by incorporating more plant types and species types, and that's what's going on the left there, individual-based modeling. And on the right, we're also improving the ability of this model to represent basic plant physiological processes and how those work. And so, as you can see, we've got an experiment here going on in the US where we're looking at how carbon moves in trees and how it controls growth, and we have been chilling the tree stems and looking at how that affects phloem carbon supply rates and how growth responds to that in the trees. And we're incorporating all that knowledge into our modeling. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Next on our list, we've got a fairly new member of staff. It's Leo. Are you here? Yes, good.
Yes, thank you, David.
I don't think you were here. Oh, good, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. This is Leo. As mentioned by Laura and David, I recently joined the Department of Land Economy as a lecturer in applied economics. So, but I did my PhD at land economy. So I'm somehow both new and not so new to the university. After my PhD, I worked in the University of Glasgow for a few years as a lecturer there, and I just came back after the lockdown. I'm an environmental economist by training. Sorry, I don't have slides like other people. As a new lecturer, I actually don't have too many different research themes or a big research team, although I'm quite keen to further develop those. So I thought it might be easier to just talk through the main research work that I do. So my research work mostly involves three general themes or directions. The first one is about assessing the performance of land-based environmental policies like protected areas or payments or subsidies to landholders for more environmentally friendly land use activities. In particular, I'm interested in why these programs perform well in some places, but not so much in other places. So it could be that these programs were designed or developed in different ways, or it could be that there are some local institutional or behavioral determinants of those of the performance of those programs that vary from one location to the other. So the second direction of my research involves the monetary or economic valuation of ecosystem services, such as the recreational services of urban green spaces or water purification services of forests. I understand many people from other disciplines very often find it quite difficult to place a monetary value on environmental amenities or ecosystem services. But I guess, in my opinion, from an academic point of view, such practices can be useful to public policy making. So it should be worthwhile to further develop the methods for this kind of practice. And also, provided that people's valuation of the environment is measured in the same way, very often there could be some patterns of people living in different places and different circumstances. For example, we might find that higher income groups may value the environment to a great extent. So that might have practical implications, such as perhaps in the long term, economic development can be a way to facilitate the transition of people's preferences towards a more environmentally friendly direction. So that's the second general direction of my research. The third one is a bit more recent. It's about how human health is affected by the environment and animal health. So it is sort of more relevant to the current public health situation, but these are more recent projects, and our fieldwork has been affected by the pandemic, unfortunately. So that's pretty much about my research themes. Methodologically speaking, I mostly do statistics and economic experiments. I also use a lot of geographic and satellite data, so a lot of synergies with many of you in this meeting. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you in person before too long. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you very much. And so next we've got another newcomer. before we got two decidedly non-newcomers after that. But the next person is Adam Pellegrini, all the way from California, most recently. Thank you very much, Adam.
All right, thank you, David. Let me just...
Oh, there we go.
My old home. All right, so thanks, David. My name's Adam. I'm a new lecturer in the Department of Plant Sciences, but I sit in the David Attenborough building as well. And I do have some pretty slides because actually most of what I study is dirt, which isn't that interesting, but I also study fire, which is really nice to look at. So the main goal of my research is trying to understand how ecosystems respond to disturbance. And my lab right now is focusing on fire. And one of the many reasons why fire is important is because it's a key player in the global carbon cycle. It burns about 570 million hectares each year. This is roughly 5% of the total land area. And you can see it's globally distributed. Basically all biomes experience fire at one point or another. And the carbon emissions that result from fires are so large that they can be detected in records of atmospheric CO2. And as a consequence of fire having such a large effect on the global carbon cycle, understanding how changes in fire will impact carbon cycling is really important for climate change. And specifically thinking about the response of ecosystems, which are just one cog in the wheel of this change. But the challenge with fire is that it's incredibly variable. So it's a landscape level process determined by ecosystem level properties. And what does that mean exactly? Well, we have factors like climate determining fire conditions and the potential for ignition and spread. But fundamentally, what determines fire behavior is the structure of the ecosystem, that plants are determining the fuel, they're determining its amount, its density, organisms are determining its decomposition. So you really need to understand multiple facets of the system. In order to understand this, we apply a diverse set of methods. So we use experimental manipulations really to isolate the effect of fire in different bioclimatic contexts. So these are large-scale fire manipulations. What you're looking at here is a fire plot in Kruger National Park, South Africa. That's about 7 hectares in size, so they're massive manipulations. And we also perform measurements, mostly studying dirt and changes in carbon in dirt. And we try to scale up our findings in 2 ways. We collaborate with some people that use ecosystem models that allow us to incorporate the mechanisms that we figure out in the field to estimate fire effects at larger spatial scales from these potentially first principle mechanisms. But then we also use a global network of fire manipulation experiments. And so this is something that I've been leading, and I've circled the places that I do quite a bit of field work, but all these other dots are areas in ecosystems that have altered fire frequencies for several decades, so anywhere from 20 to almost 80 years. So with that, that is my research, and hopefully we get to meet in person soon. Thank you. I think you're muted, David.
I'm muted. Next we have Bill Sutherland. Thank you.
Thank you, David. My name's Bill Sutherland. I'm a conservation biologist in zoology. Delighted to be here and delighted to be part of this exercise. Delighted to be involved with the David Attenborough building. It's such a stimulating place to be. So I'd like to just briefly outline what we do. One of the things we do is we do horizon scanning. So what's going to come up in the agenda? What should we as conservation biologists be thinking about in the future? So in the first one we did 12 years ago, we identified microplastics as an up-and-coming issue, which I hadn't heard of. And we do that regularly. We say these are things that we haven't heard of now, but we're likely to do in the future. And this week we're finishing our annual Horizon scan, which you should be able to read in Trends in Ecology and Evolution in another few weeks' time. Another major thing we do is collate the evidence base. So medicine has been revolutionized by people systematically looking at the evidence and including it into decisions. So it's unthinkable not to do that. We want to do the same for conservation, and Will Morgan and Andrew Bladen, who are both on this call, are part of this big project. So we want to collate all the evidence so it's available so you could use it. And then what we're doing now is we're working with practitioners saying, how do you then take that evidence and put it into practice? How do you put it into decision-making tools or writing guidance or planning, designing experiments, etc. So we're very much working together with them to get evidence used. As part of that, there's some academic work, some postgrads. So Alec Christie is doing some very exciting work working out how likely is a particular experimental design to get you the right answer. And that's kind of quite radical stuff. So it shows that the most common designs we have are likely to give you the wrong answer. And that the most rigorous ones, being rigorous really makes a difference. Tom White, we really want to know about cost effectiveness. There's a lot of work on effectiveness, but almost nothing on costs. So he's working out how you can include costs within decision making. And then Alice Stewart's interested in the nature of evidence used in practice. So what do we use or not use? We're interested in mangroves. Tom Worthington, we know that mangroves tend to be planted in places where it's a bit of a waste of time, tends not to work. So he's trying to work out where it is sensible to plant them. Agriculture, so Amelia Hood is looking at how you can create the evidence base so you can use the evidence base for making decisions for you. So I want to know, will this work for me for this particular circumstances, and how do you bring the evidence together in that way? And then finally, we've got a project called BioRisk, Biosecurity Research Initiative at St. Catherine's. It's money through a philanthropist, comes to St. Catherine's College. And we're looking across the board at biosecurity. So we're looking at pandemics, which has kept us busy in the times of COVID, but also invasive species. Phil Martin's very heavily involved in that, with a range of people from across the university to make us more prepared for biosecurity. So I'd just like to make a couple of final points. We're collecting the talks series, the CCI talks. If there's someone who you think would be a really good speaker, then let me know, because we're looking for potential speakers for next term. So send me an email if you have any bright ideas. And then enjoy your time here if you're a newcomer, and come and see me. I like talking to people, and look forward to seeing you in 3 dimensions in person in the David Attenborough building over a cup of coffee sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I have a cardboard cutout of David Attenborough in the David Attenborough building. He's 2-dimensional, just to add confusion to all this. But he's been stolen by somebody in CCI office, I notice at the moment. I need him back.
I don't like talking to him either in 2 dimensions.
He's better in 3 dimensions, that's for sure. Finally, in this run of researchers, we've got Bhaskar Vira. Thanks very much, Bhaskar.
Thanks, David. So yeah, I'm Bhaskar Vira. I am currently in the Department of Geography, which is where I'm sitting. But I have spent many happy years in the David Attenborough building before moving back to the department. I'm currently head of department here, so I have to sit here. My background is, my training was actually in economics, and I moved into geography more recently, but I describe myself as a political economist. I'm interested in the political economy of environment and development more generally, and have tended to work on South Asia, but do have sort of some projects that are wider ranging. Mostly work on issues like forests and forest policy, but the interaction of forests with aspects of human well-being and development. I've got a real interest in things like rights, access, institutions, governance. And then increasingly in recent years, that relationship between forests and people has been framed using the language of ecosystem services. So I use kind of my lens as a political economist to interrogate that language of ecosystem services. What does it actually mean? But also focus on particular types of service relationships. Recent work has included work on forests and water, work on forests and food security, looking at the agriculture-forest interface and the kind of trade-offs at landscape scale. So a whole set of issues which involve people and forests in a sense. A second set of research questions around trade-offs more generally, and particularly trade-offs between conservation goals and developmental goals, and how those are sort of manifested and managed at different scales, local to global. Impacts that those trade-offs have on people, trying to kind of get a sense of, I guess, sort of relatively simplistic narratives of win-win, which I'm always quite skeptical about, and trying to understand the real world as one which does involve trade-offs. Who are the winners and losers when we make choices about conservation and development? A third set of issues have been really about natural capital as a concept, but a broader set of questions around how we attribute value to nature. How does society attribute value to nature? How do we make those choices? And what is the role of economics in making those choices, but what are the limitations of the economic framework? And I find myself able to make some of those interventions having a training in economics and being skeptical about its value, but equally recognizing some of the tools. So that's kind of my broad work. We don't have groups in the social sciences, but some of my students are encouraging me to call myself a group. So I will see whether we become a group, but we're not a group. We are a collection of researchers who work together. I'm privileged to have 4 PhD students at the moment. Lucy Goodman's working on dams and development and debates around dams and development, and she often spends time in the David Attenborough building when we're able to. Charlotte Milbank is working on forests and food, sort of wild foods and uncultivated foods, and thinking through some of those issues. Alice Millington is looking at the values of nature held in Tibetan cosmovisions and how those shape contemporary attitudes to climate change. And I've got a new PhD student who did the MPhil in conservation leadership a couple of years ago, Prerna Bindra, and she's going to be looking at conservation development trade-offs, especially in relation to displacement issues in India. A few postdocs, Yuan Pan, who's on the call, I think, who's working with me on a new CCI Collaborative Fund funded project, which is looking at post-COVID impacts on conservation landscapes and sustainable financing models. And I have postdocs working with me in geography on a range of issues to do with agriculture and development. That's Shreya Sinha, on displacement and rehabilitation and resettlement in India, Shashi Singh, and one which is sort of not really directly connected with conservation. She works more on the future of work and employment in sub-Saharan Africa. That is me done.
Thank you very much, Bhaskar. Now, I'm going to go a bit off piste at this stage, and Howard's going, oh, no, don't do it, because we're already a few minutes behind schedule. But I think, because this is high octane stuff, I think it'd be good to have a few minutes break just to reset our minds and relax slightly. So can I suggest we have sort of 4 minutes break just to before the next session, just to refresh our brains and get relaxed again. So I know how fast we're going.
I'm okay with that, David.
Oh,
it's okay.
See you soon.